Imagine opening your eyes in the middle of the night, surrounded by a silence so deep you can hear the ice cracking outside. Your breath turns into a cloud in front of your face. There's no heating, no electric blankets, just a roof covered in earth and grass, a dead fire, and the bodies of your children sleeping only a few inches from yours. If you don't curl up with them, you'll freeze. That was the reality of the Viking winter. And yet, they survived. In northern Scandinavia, between the 8th and 11th centuries, winter temperatures could drop below minus 30 degrees Celsius. For a civilization without gas, electricity, or modern insulation, such numbers would have been a death sentence, if not for the fact that the Vikings developed an entire survival system based on knowledge of their environment, using the human body as a heat source, and architecture adapted to extreme cold. The first line of defense was the Viking longhouse, or langhus. From the outside, it might look like a rustic wooden structure buried in snow, but inside, every inch was designed to retain heat. These dwellings were not just sleeping spaces, they were thermal shelters. Their sloped roofs were covered with thick layers of turf that, in addition to blending into the landscape, provided insulation comparable to that of a modern house. The walls had a central layer of compacted earth between planks, acting as a barrier against the icy wind. And they weren't alone inside. One of the most surprising methods the Vikings used to generate heat was sleeping alongside their animals. Cows, sheep, goats, and even horses shared the same space as families. It might seem unhygienic today, but it made sense. A single large animal could radiate as much heat as a stove. A cow's body constantly emitted a huge amount of heat, and keeping it indoors meant none of that warmth was wasted. Sheep were literally living blankets, and horses not only generated heat, but also served as natural alarms against predators or intruders. The layout of the space also helped. The stables were built slightly lower than the area where humans slept. This allowed the animals' heat to naturally rise toward the beds, while cold drafts stayed trapped in the lower area. Fire, of course, was another essential element, but not in the way we imagine today. Instead of chimneys, Viking houses often had a central hearth that burned constantly. The smoke escaped slowly through a small hole in the roof. This wasn't a design flaw, it was intentional. The lack of a chimney prevented heat from escaping too quickly. The smoke not only preserved the wooden structure and repelled insects, but also helped warm the turf roof, storing heat like a massive thermal battery. On the coldest nights, the Vikings practiced a simple yet ingenious habit. They would take hot stones from the fire, wrap them in sheepskins, and place them under the benches where they slept. These stones held heat for hours, acting like natural hot water bottles. Some hearths were even built in a conical shape to distribute heat evenly throughout the room. And when wood was scarce, a common problem in areas with few trees or in long winters, they turned to alternative fuels like dried animal dung or blocks of peat. Both burned slowly, producing less flame but more steady heat. A discrete type of combustion, without big bursts, ideal for long winter nights where keeping a stable temperature mattered more than lighting the room. The bed layout also followed thermal logic. They didn't sleep on the floor, since cold air pools at low levels. Instead, they built raised wooden platforms against the walls. Some were so large that several people could sleep together, shoulder to shoulder, sharing body heat. In some homes, a small loft was even added above the main beams, serving as a raised sleeping area where the warmest air in the room would collect. The goal wasn't comfort, it was survival, and the Vikings left nothing to chance. Their way of building, organizing their homes, and even how they lay down at night all served one purpose: to keep warm. Warmth that came from fire, animals, and human contact. But architecture wasn't everything. Outside, the snow fell relentlessly. Inside, the fire burned weakly. For the Vikings, true heating began on the skin. They never slept naked, not even removing clothes to go to bed. On the contrary, they covered themselves with everything they had. Their bed wasn't a place for comfort, but a trench against the cold. Every garment was another layer of defense, another barrier against the biting air that slipped through the cracks in the wood. Today, mountaineers know this method as the onion technique, wearing several overlapping layers to retain body heat. The Vikings had already mastered it more than 1,000 years ago. Their clothing was made mainly of thick wool, tanned hides, and linen. Wool, especially when felted, created a layer of trapped air next to the body, perfect for keeping in warmth. The outer layers were made of leather or seal skin, resistant to wind and water. On stormy days, they turned to wolf, bear, or reindeer hides. It wasn't about aesthetics. It was pure necessity. Cloaks were usually fastened with metal brooches at shoulder height, a design that allowed them to be quickly adjusted and prevented heat from escaping through the neck. Fur hats, hooded cloaks, and boots stuffed with moss or straw were common in winter. Instead of socks, they sometimes used strips of cloth wrapped around their feet, creating a kind of homemade insulation that absorbed moisture and kept warmth in. But even with all those layers, body heat had its limits. That's why Viking nutrition during the cold months was essential. They didn't just eat to survive, they ate to stay warm. The winter diet was rich in animal fats: whale, seal, lard, buried butter, broths with bones rich in collagen, cured meat, and dried fish. Calorie-dense foods meant to release energy slowly while the body rested. A single gram of whale fat, for example, could provide more than twice the calories of a modern energy bar. This energy not only helped them move or work, it generated internal heat, maintaining body temperature through the night. Some meals were even reserved specifically for before bedtime. A bowl of hot broth full of fat could mean the difference between a freezing night and a bearable one. This fat took hours to digest, releasing heat from within like a slow fire functioning as a biological stove. And if shortages arose, the Vikings were never without resources. They had underground storage pits where they buried lard, dried fish, and fermented meat. Their pantry wasn't just a food reserve, it was a survival system planned months in advance. All this was complemented by their final and perhaps most powerful source of warmth: the human body. Vikings did not sleep alone. Parents, children, grandparents all shared the same space, sometimes even the same bed. Not just out of affection, though that surely existed, but as a strategy. The collective body heat of 4 or 5 people sleeping together under thick hides could raise the immediate air temperature by several degrees. Dogs also played their role. They weren't simply pets or guards, they were heat sources. They slept alongside humans, and in some cases were allowed into the beds. The hides covering the sleeping benches were sewn together to form true thermal capsules, a kind of skin igloo capable of retaining the heat of all the bodies inside. Even under those conditions, sleep wasn't rest. It was endurance. Every layer of clothing, every spoonful of fat, every inch of shared skin was a vital decision. The Vikings understood that warmth wasn't a luxury. It was a daily battle against winter. And that battle began at sunset, when darkness and ice reclaimed their domain. No matter how many hides, fires, or fats were used, the cold from the ground was relentless. The earth itself seemed to steal heat from the body. That's why the Vikings adopted a quiet but effective solution: building partially below ground level. Many Viking longhouses were dug into the earth, not for aesthetics, but for thermal reasons. Being partially sunken meant the walls were sheltered from the wind, and the ground itself acted as natural insulation. In winter, it kept a more stable and less extreme temperature than the outside air, and in summer it cooled the interior. a passive, ancient system that would inspire eco-friendly architects today.